America, let's talk about structural injustice. The problem with patriarchy isn't patriarchs, and the problem with racism isn't racists. What's going on here? Structural injustice. Hit the beats, y'all. Justice concerns the conditions for a community's collaborative relations.
Sound good to me.
Injustices are obstacles to this collaboration. Now let's draw a distinction between particular injustice and structural injustice. Now, general characteristics of particular injustice include there's a victim who's targeted, you have someone to blame, we have an entire judicial system organized around sussing out the guilty party and asking that guilty party to pay restitution to the state or the person that they've injured. This works on the model of particular injustice. However, structural injustice has different characteristic features. The victims are not personally identified, rather they're targeted by their social position. There's no one to blame. The injustices arise through normal legal interactions that predictably lead to stigmatized groups being degraded because of their vulnerable or stigmatized position. The global apparel industry serves as a crystalline example. In 2007, when you walked in JCPenney to pick out a shirt, that JCPenney had a contract with an importer called Renzo. Renzo would then give the specifications to Robillard Industries in the Philippines, and Robillard would then find factories who would produce the shirts according to these specifications. Now, these factory owners would then give the JCPenney specifications to managers, and these managers would then find laborers and give the specifications to those laborers. And these laborers would take any unfinished work home with them to finish, where the laborers would enlist their grandparents or their children in order to help them make quota. Each level of subcontracting diffuses the responsibility for the working conditions of the laborers at the bottom level of the supply chain. You can say, these people consent to work for a sweatshop. Well, no, the desperate conditions faced by the laborers is a measure of the coercive pressures of the laborers' circumstances rather than the laborers' consent. All of the contractors above the laborers, the managers, the factory owners, the exporters, the importers, will claim that the competitive market forces them to exploit their subcontractors. The problem in the JCPenney case isn't in the individual bad guy, but the organization of the market that's structured to extract labor from grandmas and Tiny Tim. In the absence of a bad guy, everyone who participates in the market has a responsibility simply by being a participant to make sure that the structure of the market doesn't create a problem for justice. Redressing structural injustice does not call for a single lawsuit against a bad guy. It calls for collective action by everyone implicated in the system, especially those who profit from it, to recognize and support the struggles of the most vulnerable members of the structure. To recap, in issues of structural injustice, no one is to blame, but everyone is responsible for participating in the collective action to redress these structural injustices. If the U.S. drug habit leads to families in Mexico being terrorized by cartels, while these cartel members brandish U.S.-made weapons in order to satiate a U.S. drug habit, that's on the U.S. If your racialized suburb has an inflated property value because of the U.S. legacy of racial discrimination, it's your responsibility to engage in collective action aimed at making the nation whole and end neighborhood segregation. Thanks for watching this week's episode. Find me on Facebook or Twitter, and I'll keep you posted on the next installment of The Funky Academic.